We all love performance cars, but they nearly all come with some form of compromise. It might be space, comfort, your equipment levels, your practicality. At some point, you're going to have to make a sacrifice.
But what if there was one car where you didn't? One car that was actually all things to all petrol heads.
For many of us, that car is the Audi RS6. This is a performance car that, providing you can afford the $216,000 price of admission, prides itself on being the exact opposite of compromised. There's a reason this car is the one that we all seem to include in our one-car dream garage, because it has it all. Good looks, ferocious speed, loads of equipment, room for the kids, and a boot big enough even for the largest of Labradors.
But I can tell what you're thinking. Trying to please everyone is often a recipe for disaster. Is this a case of being a jack of all trades and a master of none? And when it comes to the RS6, you might actually have a point. You see, Audi's fast wagons have always been, well, brutally fast, but they haven't always been the most involving things to drive. They've always felt a little bit nose heavy, and they have a tendency to understeer at the limit. So while there's enough power to bother a 911 away from the traffic lights, the same can't be said when the road gets twisty. Audi's engineers have worked really hard to change all of that with this generation of RS6. This is a big car at 2,075 kilos, but it now has a four-wheel steering system, and they've made the steering itself quite fast as well, at just over 2 turns lock to lock. And initial impressions are, it's actually surprisingly agile. The Quattro all-wheel drive system can also send up to 85% of the torque to the rear axle. So initially, yeah, this thing feels pretty pointy for a big bus. Before we dig too much further into what it's like to drive, I wanted to pull over and talk you through some of the details, because some of them are worth pointing out, like these huge 22-inch wheels, and behind them are lurking optional carbon ceramic brakes, which measure 440 mils at the front, clamped by 10 piston calipers. They are absolutely enormous. I also really love these Matrix LED headlights, which, aside from working really well, also have the coolest on-off sequence of any car on sale, I reckon. And they're a big part into what makes this car look so cool. I mean, this is meant to be a family station wagon, but it's just so angry. Like, look at these flared guards, front and rear. And I think the stance of the car is just absolutely spot on. I also really like the spec of this particular one, right down to the Tango red paint and these blacked out badges. I think it looks brilliant. And thanks to all of these fancy systems, it promises to drive better than ever as well. Question is, has it all worked? The first thing you notice when you start to push on with an RS6 is the speed and the power. Oh. Under the bonnet, or hood, if you're watching us in America, is a 4-litre twin-turbo V8, but they have made some big changes, including to the turbos, which now have more boost. And that's pushed total outputs up to 441 kilowatts and 800 Newton meters. That's a lot in a family station wagon. Officially, Audi says this car will do 0 to 100 in 3.6 seconds, and it feels every bit as fast as that. So even though you can put your dog in the back of this car, I would not recommend putting your lab in the boot when you do a full launch control, because once this thing gets up and boogies, it is really, really quick. Brakes are good as well, luckily so, because this thing is a big, heavy car, but 440mm carbon ceramic discs They've got no issue in pulling it up when you're starting to push on.
The handling has also improved. The four-wheel steering helps to cut almost a metre from the turning circle at low speed, but it also makes the car feel more agile and alert at high speed. And the steering itself, often an Audi weakness, is quick and accurate, although I do wish it gave you a bit more feedback.
I just love the way you get it loaded into a corner and you can just lean as you feel the weight transfer onto the outside tyre. This is a big car, don't get me wrong. On windy roads like this, you are aware that you have a lot of weight behind you and you are almost bending the laws of physics, but it's also possible to hustle this car as well, and it does have a sense of agility to it that I was not expecting. Does it feel as agile or as reactive as a purpose-built sports car like a 911? No, of course it doesn't, and it doesn't feel quite as rear-driven as an E63 or an M5, but you can hustle this thing, and there is some agility to the chassis. As a tool for tracing a line and just demolishing corners at outrageous speeds, this generation of RS6 is mighty impressive.
But it's after you've finished demolishing a twisty road that you really notice this Audi's breadth of ability.
This is an absolutely brilliant car for covering big distances. These seats have lots of lateral support, but they're built primarily for comfort. We've been in the car all day now and haven't got a hint of leg or back pain. The vision out is absolutely spot on, and these windows are double glazed, which is important because we are rolling on 22-inch hoops with low profile rubber. Around town, the engine stops being a nuclear bomb and just turns into a big softie, really. It's calibrated really nicely with this 8-speed torque converter automatic, and you can just surf along on these huge reserves of torque as you're dropping the kids off at school or soccer practice. You would not suspect that you have a car with more than 600 horsepower at your disposal. The back seat, lots of room and creature comforts back there, window blinds, your own climate control. And up the front, the cabin is top shelf. This is an Audi. All of the materials are a high quality, and the functionality of all of them is also really nice. This one has a few choice options like this Alcantara steering wheel and Alcantara on the shifter knob, and it has these carbon fiber inlays too, which I really like because it has an exposed weave which you can run your finger across. I absolutely love that. One thing I'm a little bit unsure on are these big sections of piano black on the center console and across the dash. They look great when they're clean, but they're also a bit of a fingerprint magnet, as are these twin screens. I was a little bit critical of these screens in the RS Q8, but now that I've been using them, I actually find the functionality really good. It's just about keeping them clean. One thing you are not going to be short of in an RS6 is information, because not only do you have these two screens here, but you've also got a fully digital instrument cluster and a head-up display. Sometimes it can feel a little bit like information overload, but I guess it's better to have more than less. All things considered, this is a great long-legged GT car.
And it's a wagon, so it's got a big boot. With the rear seats up, it's a healthy 565 litres, and with them down, that balloons to 1680. That's not quite as much as you get from an E63 wagon, or even as much as you get from an Audi RS Q8, but it's still impressively practical.
As for compromises, well, you are going to have to make some sacrifices, inevitably. As good as the handling is and as grippy as this car is, ultimate agility and chuckability is something you're going to have to sacrifice a little bit. And so is efficiency. Today, the computer's telling me that we have drunk 18.5 litres per 100 Ks, which is not exactly frugal. And yes, I do understand the irony of picking on a big, heavy car with a big V8 for drinking lots of fuel, but it is something worth mentioning. As an overall package, I can't think of much else that offers such a convincing blend of speed, performance, handling, and practicality. I guess an RS4 does, for a chunk less change. And so will the M3 Touring, which is coming to Australia next year sometime. But both of those cars are slower and smaller. So is the RS6 the ultimate performance car? Well, if you've only got one space in your garage, yeah, I reckon that's the one to put in it.